Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the August meeting of the Divorce Support Club. With me, Claire Macklin. I'm a breakup and divorce coach, and I work alongside Walker Family Law to bring you the Support Club every month. We are here to give something extra to the purely legal. We're here to help you focus on yourself, to find ways to get calm and clarity, to be able to focus on what you can control, to see options and choices, to communicate more effectively, and also we have sessions around creating your new life post-divorce. So we cover divorce from the beginning right through to the end. And I'm joined here today from Walker Family Law by Emily Green. Emily Green is a solicitor in Walker Family Law's divorce department. She does all kinds of divorce-related work, divorce finances, and private children work, children arrangements, and so on. So she has lots of experience, and I'm sure will chip in as and when required during the session. So thank you for being here, Emily.
Thank you.
And we're also joined today by a very special guest, Heather Rutherford, who runs the Parenting Partnership. Heather is a parenting coach who has been through her own separation and divorce. And if at the end we'll give you details of Heather's website. There are lots of resources on there for parents who are contemplating or going through separation. And her work really focuses on how we can best support children through this process and help them come out the other side with their well-being intact. So I met Heather first of all, I think it was last October, November, at a resolution event in Bristol, and we went for a coffee afterwards, and we got on really well, and we have a very similar way of looking at things, and it's a real delight to be able to work alongside her, helping clients along with her. So really, really welcome, Heather. Thank you for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a delight.
So let's jump straight in. So Heather, when we focus on the well-being of our children through divorce as a process, what things would you say are the most important things that as parents we need to be aware of?
I think very good question, a very good place to start. I think that the two big things are that we know that if we look at our goal, which is really our children coming out through this process, as you said beautifully before, with as healthy, with their well-being intact and thriving. And the two things that we know from the research that are really, really important and then have an impact are conflict and also children being able to have a relationship, if it's safe to do so, with both their parents. So it may sound really obvious, the conflict part, but all the research does say that it is this exposure to ongoing conflict that really has a damaging effect. And if we think about it, it makes so much sense because our children look to us as parents, their primary caregivers, to provide them with safety, security, help them feel understood and soothed. And if in fact they're experiencing this ongoing conflict, it's a really, really distressing and unsettling place for them to be. So I like to sort of look back and think, what are our children's needs? And therefore, what potentially could be the situations that are difficult. So, and the second part, and as we always say, if it's safe to do so, children really do best when they have the opportunity to have a relationship with both their parents. Children see themselves very much as part, mom, part dad, or part of each of their co-parents. So therefore, to not be able to have that kind of relationship again is not ideal. So we can talk a lot more about it because that's partly where the complications arise, so often with all the emotions that each parent is going through, that sometimes they find that really difficult. But those are really the two most important things to be aware of. And then the other part, which we're going to talk about today, is what can we do to really think about always putting our children first. What does that mean? It means that we really always want to ask ourselves the question, how might this impact my child? Not just practically necessarily, but really, really emotionally. So I think if we come at this process, which is sort of untangling a marriage, and focusing on the family, which is what keeps going. The marriage ends, the family continues. It's really reminding ourselves, which I feel gives us great guidance through the process, and putting our children always first and not in the middle.
I think this something that I often talk about with clients is really distinguishing between your ex-partner as your ex-partner or your
Yeah,
ex-spouse, your ex-husband, your ex-wife, and their role as being your ex-partner whom you are no longer with, and their role as your co-parent. And they're very, very separate roles. And sometimes people get, it can be very hard sometimes when you're emotionally caught up in some of the arguments that you might be having or the conflict that there might be, to merge those two things and get them very
yeah,
muddled. And so,
yeah,
if you can really be clear about which hat you're wearing and they're wearing at particular times, I think that's really helpful. But I wanted to ask you a little bit more about understanding the importance of conflict and some of the research that you've done and some of the perhaps things that you have seen in your work.
yeah. Well, I
Talk a
think
little bit more about that. That'd be great.
I was thinking about it on my as I was coming into this, and then the other thing that we all need to put out there is actually there is healthy conflict and there is unhealthy conflict. So when we, raising our children, we actually want them to understand how to cope in a successful way with conflict, because conflict is part of life, and that's a really important skill. So conflict management, healthy conflict resolution. And if you think of the opposite, if there was no overt conflict of any kind, sort of in a family, that also cannot necessarily be that healthy, kind of all bubbles under the surface. So we need to make sure we distinguish between what is, I would call, healthy conflict and learning coping strategies, and then conflict, which is distressing, and also something that children should not be exposed to and experiencing. So it's everything from it's everything from, disagreement, sort of overt contempt, really, really distressing kind of emotions between parents, which if you think about the child who, again, looks, I always think of children, we've talked about this, Claire, that they look from one face to the other, and then they make up stories themselves. Right. So if we're in a situation where they're worried or unsettled on an ongoing basis, that's just not a healthy place for them to be, because their anxiety and stress levels are always sort of raised.
Yeah.
So
So they're living then in their kind of high
yeah,
anxious alertness,
yeah.
flight freeze. Are you able to give a couple of examples perhaps of where a conflict might be healthy and where it might slip into being unhealthy?
Yeah, so I mean, it could be anything from our lives where we say, so I don't think we should do this, or I don't agree that, it could be as simple as, we don't want to go to the soccer match this afternoon, and then, well, I really want to go, well, I don't want to go, and it's how you resolve that. So it's either, an unhealthy way of doing it might be turning around, slamming a door, and saying, you never take any of my considerations into account. You're so selfish. Now that might be not such, and this, if you imagine, this goes on and on and on. So conflicts are never resolved in a healthy way. And so that would be an example. And a more healthy one would be if the partners say, I don't agree. Well, I can tell me what it is about this that doesn't work for you. And it's more, as I'm sure Emily would say, it's more of a kind of a understanding, a seeking clarification approach, and also a curious approach to trying to understand what the other person, what are their stumbling blocks, what's they're getting in the way. I'm seeking to understand, as opposed to two people that have no interest really in hearing the other side, but have a lot of that they're coming at it from a very unconstructive point of view. So if you think of the children always as being the observers, they are the ones who are looking for guidance on how to resolve conflicts, and we are always our children's most important teacher, aren't we? We everything, from a young age, we're modeling our children are sponges. So if we think about that, we should just always check ourselves, think about the language we're using, the non-verbals that we're using, you know, like the whatever it is, the humps and the, yeah, and just think about how that's coming across to our children.
A really good question is kind of to think, when I look back on this moment and what I'm about to say or
Yeah,
do in a year's time, in 5 years' time, am I going to feel proud of myself, or am I going to
yeah,
feel a bit, yeah,
yeah.
and to really to take that into account. So what if you're in a very, if it's a lot of high conflict, what are the results for children when they're in that very high conflict situation for an extended
And
period of
ongoing. Well, as I just touched upon it, it's absolutely, the risk is that they do develop different levels of anxiety and other mental health challenges, because just as you said, Claire, that you're keeping them in this heightened fight flight response. Now, it's part of a healthy life to feel anxious sometimes. I mean, think of it kind of like waves on a beach. So it comes and it does its job, which is to make us on high alert. It could be that you're recording a podcast or making a presentation, or, you know, or have a big exam, or you've got a big case to present. And the adrenaline that runs through our body actually does help blood flow to the brain. And back in the day, it helped us escape and run away from danger. And a healthy stress response is to feel that peak, and then it dissipates and it goes away. And this is a really important thing to talk to our children about. You know, I'm wondering if you have butterflies in your tummy, or I'm wondering if that's completely normal. If, however, they are on constant state of alert, and their body, you know, and their whole doesn't have a chance to get back, sort of retreat and get back to normal thing, that's when problems can arise, because they, you know, they develop into this pattern of
Mm,
high, high anxiety response. So
mm,
that kind of makes sense. So even I'll give another really good example. In sort of healthy conflict, if let's say that you and I are partners and we have a conflict, and maybe I did say something that, you know, was heated, and that I thought about afterwards, like, oof, you know, that wasn't very helpful. We need to show our children how to repair. So in
mm,
a healthy conflict, I would say to you, maybe in, you know, not in front of the children, but also, and then I would say to my children, I just want to have a chat with you. That didn't go very well. And I realized that I was feeling stressed about this thing at something, or not to make an excuse, but to explain and to say, you know, I spoke to my other parent, I spoke to your mom, and I said that the words I said were really not helpful and inappropriate, and I apologized.
mm,
So that is helpful always. And also when we're co-parenting, you can, same thing, repair is super important. And also it helps our children, you know, embed that in their own minds, how to actually, when they make, so we all make mistakes.
yeah.
Absolutely. We are, and I always call it, we're a shame-free zone, right? We make mistakes, we apologize, and we repair, and then we move on, and we move on, right? We don't keep going back to that sort of thing. And that's really good modeling. So yeah, those are different. So the danger is the high anxiety, high levels of stress. You know, the positive is the normal is we all have situations, co-parents, it's very difficult, but we can repair, we can apologize, and we try and keep all those conversations away from our children.
Mm. Okay, that's really helpful. And the other thing that you spoke about at the beginning, that there's a lot of research around is this, you know, understanding the need for children to have a relationship with both parents. And
Mm.
well, as you said, you know, this podcast, we're not talking about relationships where there's been abuse. We're talking about relationships where it's safe for that to happen. That's a whole other webinar that we could do. So could you tell us a bit more about, you know, what the research shows about the importance of children having a relationship with both of their parents post separation?
The idea is just that that it is, again, because children are, that's who they are.
Mm.
from whatever the circumstances, however they got there. They feel that they have these primary caregivers, the co-parents, and it's really important to them to feel that sense of, I call it belonging. And they need to feel that they can feel connected, and it makes sense. So again, if it's appropriate to do so. So I think it's so complicated when we are going through separation, divorce. I know I have been there. We have our own emotions about our co-parent. And I would say it is often one of the hardest things to navigate that in a way that we try and do our utmost to put the children's needs at the center. So we've just said if they can have a relationship, if it is just the right thing, it's the appropriate thing to do. Age, age appropriately again, and this will maybe adjust as they get older. But for them to feel that they can actually develop that is a huge sense of security and stability for them. And you and I think we've talked a little bit about it. The challenge also is everything from if you were the primary caregiver and you had a more absent because of whatever co-parent, that can be a really difficult thing for us emotionally. And it's just important, therefore, to remember that it isn't, in the child's best interest that for them to develop their own. It's going to be a separate relationship to the one that you have, but they can both be good relationships.
Yeah,
And
they can both exist at the same time,
yeah,
can't
and
they?
I was thinking I have a lovely way of, I think, of looking at this, especially if you have a younger child. And if you said to a younger child that they're like 7 or something like that, and they said, so tell me about your family. If you said, tell me about your family, and then the little child would say, well, I have a home. My parents are divorced, so I have 2 homes, 2 homes. I have a home with mommy, and that's where Molly the dog lives, right? And then I have a home with daddy, and that's where Freddie the cat lives with my sister Sarah, and daddy's new wife, whatever. So wouldn't it be great if your child could just matter-of-factly, sort of calmly say that's their world, that's who they belong to, and it's as much as we can do to help that child who's busy just being a child, and we don't want them really to have to worry how they navigate it. So as much as we can make that available to them, I think it's a really good thing,
And
positively.
yeah, what came really strongly across there for me was that child is not in fight, flight, freeze. That child is feeling safe. That child is totally secure that they have a home here with their mum and they have a home there with their dad.
Yeah,
And that's really great. And one of the things that I've seen quite often with clients that I've worked with is where one parent will talk badly about the other parent. And so, I've heard things like, your mother is such a whatever, your dad is always lying, or whatever it might be. And those things can be really quite damaging for children too, can't they? Because there was one case in particular I remember where it became very clear after my client had spoken to the child that the child was really confused as to whether they were a good person
yeah,
because
yeah,
daddy or mummy was being called a bad person.
yeah.
And it really was affecting their sense of self-worth. And I think that's really important to remember in all of this. And so it is really important that they have a good relationship, if possible, with both parents and that the parents are polite, at the very least, about each other.
Yeah, I think that what you said is absolutely right. And the whole idea of self-esteem and the self-esteem and the estimate we pass on ourselves is all determined by their world. And as you said, because they are so tied into both parents, they even if they would never say it, they question it. So it's so important. And then I always say, and is it so important for us to try and keep that high ground and keeping the high ground. And it's a really powerful thing to remember. And even I remember when I was going through my challenging divorce, I had a picture of my 3 children like in my notebook. And I would just, when I had, it's going to help me keep
Yeah.
the higher ground. It's not about point scoring. It's actually not about being right, actually. So it's all about those children. So to your point, part of that keeping the high ground is not saying anything derogatory. And sometimes it's really hard because you don't necessarily agree with what the co-parent is doing. Again, it's another example of being really careful with the words that we use. So we can talk a little bit I'd love to talk a little bit about the concept of emotion coaching. But so the idea you might say to a child, if I don't know, let's just say their co-parent didn't make pickup as and you might say, oh my God, they're useless, or whatever it is. And instead, knowing what you said, you might say, wow, that's really hard when she has forgotten or isn't there when you expected. I bet that's really disappointing. So we focus it kind of on the feelings of the child and not putting words in their mouth, but just trying to imagine that's really disappointing for you. And you don't even have to say anything else. I mean, we might be inclined to say, he always forgets these things, or it's dad, or sometimes there's part of her that finds it hard to keep on schedule or something. So you just divide it from who they actually are. But as much as we can, we just want to pause and think about what is helpful, what could
So
come
this
out
is
of
about, this is about making sure that the children are emotionally seen and understood, isn't it? So I talk about this a lot with clients too, putting your effort into understanding how things are feeling for your children and validating that it's okay to feel that way without leaping into the temptation of trying to fix it for them. And it can be really difficult to do. So when we were preparing for this, we were talking about some of the things that children might find difficult. So, how to have things in two homes. What about, we went on holiday and we saw all these other people who were there with their mummy and their daddy, and that was sad, for example. So, you know, what what advice would you give around that? How can we have those? How can we initiate or have or encourage those conversations with our children?
Really super question, and there's a couple different parts to it. First of all, just as you said, so often when our children are struggling, and especially if it's because of the situation we have put them in, we feel all kinds of emotion ourselves. So we might feel guilty, we might feel cross with the other, their co-parent. So it's so easy, our natural inclination is to sort of dismiss their feelings or try and make them feel better, or try and distract them and move on. But actually, again, the research shows us that if we help our children to really understand what they're feeling, that's really the first step in their becoming emotionally aware, emotionally intelligent, and also really importantly, it really deepens that connection between you and your child. So there's some fantastic research that came out of the Gottman Institute in the States, and there's John Gottman that you may have heard about, who came up years ago with this idea of emotion coaching. And what he does is he studies relationships. So that's all he's done. But his idea of emotion coaching is that it's a way that we can help our children learn to manage their emotions, but manage them not in a way of like push them aside, but really to help them understand how they're feeling, help us all learn, therefore, to come up with so we recognize big emotions, so we learn to cope with them, and that we do this basically by doing it for our children first with them, so sort of co-regulating, co-soothing, and then they learn to do it themselves. So I can give you some examples. So the idea is that what we want to do is we want to, first of all, kind of stop what we're doing and put our own agenda aside. Quite hard sometimes. And then we want to tune into our children's emotions. So we want to think about, we might see a behavior. So maybe they're having either a tantrum, they're cross, they're shirty, they're kind of going into themselves. So we want to go, there's something going on here. I'm wondering what's going on under this behavior. What are the emotions that are driving that behavior? So that's our first thing that we want to do. And then we want to try and really sort of think about what the emotions might be, listen to our children, but really empathize with them and then validate validate the emotions and put them into words. So for us, I'll give us some examples, but the hard part as parents, sometimes these emotions are difficult and they're not the emotions that we want our children to be feeling. So that's why we do that, parental, we want to keep them, we want to look after them. So it could be that they, just as you said, they're frustrated, jealous, disappointed, angry, big emotions. So we want to try and think about what they might be. And then we want to, once we've named the emotion, it actually goes a long way to helping our children calm themselves down. And we can talk a bit more about that, but only then are we ready to help them together find solutions. So I have got some examples that are going to be appropriate, and things like you might say to a child who's just sitting on the floor, really up, kind of upset, saying, I can see that you hate organizing things that you have so that you have the right things in both places. I think that feels really tough for you. And I'm not saying, come on, the sooner you get it done, the sooner. I'm just trying to figure out what would it feel like to be them. And I know that child, and she likes everything really well organized in one place, and worrying about whether she's got, the right jeans in her other house or her right homework. That's really stressful. Or I might say something like, I'm just wondering if you're thinking, why would you do this to me if you knew this would be so hard about this divorce? Could I be right? And, I don't want to hear that as a parent, actually, but imagine if I said that to you and you were thinking, I might be off base, but you were thinking that, you'd kind of go, oh, at least she's trying to understand. And often when we're really emotional, it's our kind of thinking brain goes offline, and we're all in that emotional limbic system. And interestingly, you can't rationalize with anybody when they're in that state. So trying to go at it any other way than emotion to emotion is not going to get you where you want to be.
No, you're going to meet resistance.
Yeah, so we can have, and there's so many examples. You could say to a little one, oh, when you're with daddy, you miss mommy. And when you're with mommy, I think sometimes you miss daddy. That's really hard. And it's probably, it's true, but we don't often say these things. Once you've had this connection, then you can start thinking about some solutions. Like, I'm just wondering, how about if you take my special, scarf with you to daddy's. And then when you come here, you can take daddy's special base, whatever it is, here. And then you'd have a bit of us in each place. But before we've done the emotion coaching, they're not in a position to be able to, even if they're little, to have their little rational brain in gear. So
Yeah.
I think it's
that there's something underneath there as well, isn't there, around the child wondering whether it's okay to feel that. Is it okay when I'm at daddy's to miss mommy? Is it okay when I'm at mummy's to miss daddy? And they may feel that it's not okay to do that. And so just by having that emotion to emotion conversation, they will be learning that it's okay to do that. It's okay to feel those things.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Such an important
Really
point.
powerful.
So you're absolutely right. And that we say all emotions are valid. Every single emotion is absolutely just what you said, Claire, 100% valid. It's just what we do with it sometimes that needs some attention, right? So it's all about, we teach if you're feeling lonely, everything is valid. That's the way you feel. And what a gift that we give our children through this time, if we can just spend energy and time trying to get curious about how they're feeling. We won't always get it right, but imagine it's that thing about empathy. If I really tried to empathize with you rather than sympathizing, rather than brushing aside, you're going to be wanting to tell me things because you're not, you're going to get the response that emotionally you're looking for.
That's going to be incredibly powerful when you have teenagers.
No, yeah.
That's the mother of teenagers.
Like with your boys. Yeah. And I think that also the other part, going back to safety, so I can talk a lot about this because I think it's so important. The safety part is that whatever you tell me, you're my child. Whatever you tell me, we've got this. Nothing you tell me will be something that together we can't manage, especially, as you said, teenagers. And so and you might have to manage yourself sometimes, but that's the message, that together, together we've got this. And that's this idea of them feeling super, secure as they're going through this, kind of choppy water. They're with you. You're on it together. You've got balance, you've got foundations, you have stability, which is important.
Yeah, and I think that the 4 words there are 4 words that you use, aren't there? You wrote a blog from my website a while
Yeah.
back explaining them. So if anybody wants to go have a look at that, but making sure that our children are safe, seen, soothed, and secure.
Yeah.
And essentially that's what we're talking about, achieving that even while you're going through something as choppy as a divorce. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting because we can talk more about even the kind of John Gottman approach is that it's, as a parent, you want to embrace emotional emotion as a time for intimacy and teaching. And that's like a really big thing, especially the way a lot of us were brought up, which is like with that. So it's this, if you think about that, I think that this time of navigating with our children, this change in the family, positive, it's hard, but we can think of it actually as an opportunity positively, that we will have a much deeper relationship with their children. I don't know about you, Claire, but I feel I have gone to so many places with my children that I might not have gone to emotionally unless that we have been through this together. Clearly, we don't wish this upon. It's not what I wished for when I had my children and got married all those years ago. But if I look at it from the point of view of where we are now, and this connection and relationship, this work that we do, which is hard, is so rewarding.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel exactly the same. Yeah.
Yeah.
So let's talk about some practical tools, because we've talked about quite a lot of sort of theoretical kind of things and goals to aim for. So I'd like everyone to go away with some practical tools, perhaps, that they can use, on an everyday basis, to help their children. So what would be, some of the really practical, small things that we can start to do every day and make habits, that will really help?
I think that if we think about divorce and separation as transition and change, and we know as human beings that generally we like predictability, consistency rather than chaos. So we're navigating, and what we want to do as much as we can to think about, how can I keep things consistent, even if they can't be consistent or predictable? How can I avoid this chaos and unpredictability? Because again, going back to our children's well-being, especially some children with a temperamentally who really need predictability, that's very unsettling. So as you said, practically, it goes back to I call it setting up for success. So you're thinking of the situation. It could be that you're just about to start on spending a bit more time between the two houses, whatever it is that you want to think, how can I make this as easy for my children? How can we make this as easy for our children as possible? So age dependently, I'm a big fan of things such as visual whiteboards, visual calendars, so that they can see exactly what they're doing. So practically, it is helping your child once you've done that. So things like, okay, so tomorrow, remember, tomorrow mommy's collecting you from school and you're going right to swimming. So let's think, what will you need for tomorrow? Let's get it out. We're always going to get it out the night before. So you're doing all these little things so that they're setting up for success, so that everything's in the right place, taking away any chaos. So moment by moment. And it could also be communication with your co-parent. If things like foods your children like, just as their routine, as much as you can communicate, however you do that effectively, whether it's on email, whether it's WhatsApp or through My Family Wizard or something like that. So just if the words we want to think about are anticipating how it will feel, and it's being predictable, is trying to set them up for success as much as we possibly can. And the other part to that is the practical side, and then always, now that you know about the emotional side of things, it's always setting them up emotionally. So, okay, let's just chat about what's happening this week. How are you feeling about that? Is there anything you're worried about? Is there anything, how will that feel when you need to do X? So it's the both sides together.
Yeah.
And little kids, it's like I had a really lovely client yesterday who's already got a 18-month-old, and it's a big shift because it's doing some overnights and everything else, but it's doing things like having cuddly toys in both places, having even things like, if it helps, the same sheets or things they like, or the same sleeping bag, as much as you can, so that the child can concentrate on being with you.
Yeah.
And you're together, and not necessarily be worried about it. And then the final thing I would just say on that is that I'm also a big proponent. We talk a lot with our clients about the temperament of each unique child. So how our children experience the world depends upon their sort of partly on their innate temperament, as well as the way we parent. So going through separation and divorce, I know I had it with my children. They each experience it differently. So to your point about the practical side of things, as you're working on that, think about, what does this unique child need? So the one who really, really needs to know where everything is because they really thrive on predictability, probably going to spend a bit more time making sure that everything is clear. She knows exactly what she's doing. You might write her little notes, help her with her, with a diary, different age appropriate. The one who's maybe slightly a bit more flexible, you might need to help them in another way. So does that make sense? You just really think about each particular one and what makes the difference. And as parents, we know, things like, everything about food, routine. It's really important to children, isn't it? To make them feel.
Yeah, a really good question as well. I found with my two was to actually just ask them what they need.
Yeah, that's exactly. Yeah.
And it sounds really simple, but we often forget to do it. And it's one of the things that, inadvertently we do things that we later think are mistakes. We might make assumptions about what they need, and we might make assumptions about why they're feeling a certain way. And actually, sometimes it's just worth stopping and asking, what do you need in order to feel ready to go? Or what do you need in order to help you with whatever the big feeling is that you've just talked to me about? And I watched a webinar a couple of years ago, and there was a chap on there talking about 3 questions that you can ask your children every day. And the first one is, what's your number? So out of 10, how are you feeling today? With 10 being brilliant and one
Yeah.
being, oh, this is dreadful. So ask your children, what's your number?
Yeah.
What's your word? So how are you feeling today? What's your one word? I'm feeling happy, or I'm feeling great, I'm feeling whatever it might be. And then the last question is there anything you want to talk about? And they might say no, and then you have to leave it. But
Yeah.
I worked with a client after I saw this, I was telling her about it, and she started doing this with her children. And they created an entire new routine for their mornings around it, particularly around the second question of what's your word, because it kind of then became, how are you feeling? Because one of them one time gave an answer that was, I'm feeling sad. And so her next question, then she inserted another one, which was, how would you like to feel? And he said,
Yeah.
oh, I'd really like to feel, I can't remember what the word was, but I'd really like to feel positive, or whatever it was. And they started writing the what I'd like to feel words on post-it notes and putting them on the wall. And so
Oh,
they would look, and then they started looking at it and picking out, what word do I want to be today, and how am I going to find opportunities to feel that? So it kind of took on a whole life of its own and became something much bigger than what it was to start with. And it started becoming about intention setting and looking for opportunities to feel positive or proud or whatever it might be. I thought that was brilliant.
that's a really great idea. And
Mm,
also something like that helps them expand their vocabulary of emotions, because I always
Yeah.
think there's a great, I love Brene Brown, and
Mm.
she's got a great book called Atlas of the Heart, and which I listened to the audiobook, but she was just saying that she asked all these therapists what were the kind of what were the emotions clients talked about. And basically, they came up with 5 emotions: happy, sad, I can't remember what they all were now, but anyway, the point was there actually is, there's the vocabulary of emotions is this big.
Yeah.
And yeah, so the more you do that with your kids, then they can start saying disappointed or
Mm.
frustrated rather than just sad, which is
Yeah.
just it's such a
Yeah.
great thing.
Yeah.
So
There's I have a
good
great
idea.
emotions wheel that I
Yeah,
use with people. And we can
good
attach that
idea.
actually when we put this onto
Yeah,
YouTube, we can put a link to it possibly. And it's got sort of 6 in the middle: sad, happy, angry, goes around. But then it's got subdivisions of all of these things. So there are probably 100 words on there, which is really helpful. And there are simplified ones of those for children. So if your children struggle to describe what their emotions are, you can perhaps use something like that to help them.
really good
Um,
idea.
or sometimes they might know where they are feeling them in their body, and they might be able to say, "Well, I'm feeling is I'm feeling it in my tummy, or I'm feeling it in my shoulders, or I'm feeling it in my head," and you can explore it that way as well.
Yeah,
Essentially,
that's
yeah.
that's a really good idea.
Um, so we also talked about we've talked a little bit about language, or you talked a little bit about language earlier, and there are some important language things I think here as well. So these are some of the things that you can practical tools that you can use. So just some of the terms that you might use. So I've always been very careful with my children to talk about dad rather than saying your father, or
Yes.
or something worse. Um, so are there some other examples of perhaps language where you've picked up things like that with your clients that might be helpful for our listeners?
I think that's a really good point. I think it's just remembering exactly how things are received on the other end, and as again, age appropriately. So,
Mm.
and I think the the nice things are when you still talk about it positively. You still talk about our family, and you could say, as you said before, we don't, one of the things I was thinking about, you don't say, when are you coming to older kids, when are you coming home necessarily, because that presumes for them that their other home isn't a home necessarily. Or you could say, when are you coming to Bristol, or when are you coming back here, or little things like that. So you're not making it where they feel they have to make choices as well, which I think is quite important. And also things about time with the other person. That other bits of language are positively, again, it's you could be look what you're looking forward to, holidays together, things like that. And then also I was just looking at the one of the questions that we had in our Q&A, just about how you talk about the other parent, which does have to do with words as well. So
Mm.
if there are things that are a challenge, one way that that we can talk about them is to say that the challenging part is a part of them, not their whole. So in other words, what I mean is just the point where I said before about the disappointing. It's disappointing when she doesn't come to collect you, or it's disappointing when she raises her voice. Part of her means it's hard for her sometimes to stay calm all the time. So you're not actually saying it's the whole person. You're just trying to explain that there are parts of her that things find that are challenging sometimes. So, which I think again is just word driven. It's just you want to say something and you just think for a minute, what could be helpful here? What could be helpful for my child, and what do they need to hear?
Yeah. And that we've had a couple of other questions that are related to this as well. So one that's come up in the Q&A now, around how you manage co-parenting with another parent who may have mental health issues, for example, perhaps depression or alcohol
Yeah,
misuse and things like that, which can make people unpredictable. So they might be very kind and generous and
yeah,
everything is 1 minute, and then angry the next minute. And what you've just said there maybe possibly quite helpful in that circumstance.
Yeah,
Um,
so I think that's a really that it's said very well in the question is that the idea that unpredictability, if you think about everything we've said so far, that's really hard for a child,
yeah.
right? On every sense. First of all, that it's a parent, so they're processing this is my parent. And the second part is that we know that unpredictability and anger is challenging for a child to see in any adult, but especially their own. So again, it's that idea of being able to just think emotionally. That must be, and as long as the child, obviously, with the safeties are different, that must be that's really difficult for you when whatever it's your mom or your dad gets cross like that, isn't it? It's really hard, and you can say that it's not appropriate to shout and be angry at a
Mm.
child, and they find that part really difficult. So it's because you don't want to be like, oh, that you're actually thinking that that's fine, but also you're drilling down to how it feels for that child, and that I'm wondering if that makes you feel really scared sometimes, or if you feel worried. And then sometimes he's so loving and kind, which is wonderful.
Mm.
And that's
Yeah,
the
it's a really I have lots of conversations like this with clients because and people are often people are often asking is it okay for me to say that that behavior is not okay?
Mm.
And of
yeah,
course, it is okay to say that behavior is not okay.
yeah,
And in fact, if you say anything other than that, you may be sort of gaslighting your own child that this behavior is actually all right. And of course, it isn't. And this might be a really good time to bring you in, Emily, actually, in terms of, if you are in a situation where you may not be able to sort some of these things out between the two of you.
Mhm.
We've been talking on the assumption that that is the best thing to do, and it is the best thing to do if you can.
yeah.
But there might be situations where that's not possible. So if you could perhaps give us a little bit of background around, where what the law might be able to do, and how you could potentially help clients in some of
Mm.
these situations, that'd be brilliant.
Yeah, of course. So obviously every circumstance is different. When clients come in, it's specific to what their circumstances are at that point in time and what the dispute is. What we try and do at an early stage is to identify what those issues are and then try and resolve them if we possibly can. We're trying to reduce the conflict, not increase the conflict. So
Mm.
if there are safeguarding issues such as alcoholism, mental health issues, depression, and that child could possibly be at risk, the safeguarding is the paramount concern, making sure that that child is safe in an environment and creating boundaries. So it may be that direct contact in that circumstance is not appropriate, and it may be that we need to have some supervised contact to ensure that child is protected and that there is somebody there to ensure that things don't get out of hand. Or it may be that indirect contact is appropriate by FaceTime calls, things like that. Generally, when the clients come in, we try and identify what those issues are and try and resolve those issues if we possibly can. Listening to you guys today is obviously lovely from my point of view because I only see the conflict situation and when things don't work out. I think if everybody was willing to have a divorce support coach or somebody that could guide them in relation to children and how they can resolve their difficulties, half of these cases that go to court wouldn't actually end up going to court at all. What I picked up on earlier and what you said, the presumption of the court is that unless there is contrary shown, so in domestic abuse situations or safeguarding issues, that it is in a child's best interest to have contact with both parents, and that is going to promote their welfare. So that is where the court benchmark would always start. How the court would look to resolve these types of issues is under the welfare checklist, and there is a whole list that I could go through here, but you could see them on the internet, and that will basically take you through what the court would look at in trying to resolve the issues that are present. There is a huge emphasis, I would say now, on non-court dispute resolution. So the courts are extremely overwhelmed at the moment, and it can take many, many months to get a case to court. Meanwhile, the children are obviously stuck in the middle of this conflict, and the months are passing and the damage and harm is being done. So the non-court route at the moment is being really pushed through in terms of mediation, independent third parties. There's lots and lots of different avenues that people could look at to try and resolve these issues that aren't court-based. And we would say only really look at going to court as an absolute last resort. It's going to cost a huge amount of money. It will take a long time. And generally, people don't come out of court in a happy environment, feeling better for it. And the children are the ones that end up suffering because they are involved in the conflict, and that lives with them potentially for the rest of their lives. So if you can, as parents, take the emotion out of the situation if at all possible and take a step back. And like you said, put the different hats on, that is going to benefit your children in the long run.
Yeah, I mean, and that seems like a really good thing to perhaps, to be really emphasizing, thinking about how you want your children to, and I mean, this was something that massively helped me when I was going through my first divorce, was thinking about how I wanted my children, who were tiny at the time, to feel at their wedding when they weren't going to have to worry about whether I could sit on the same table as their dad to eat my dinner.
I had a really interesting conversation with a group of friends in the lead up to this. And I just had a general conversation in terms of people that have had parents that have divorced. How do you feel about it now? And it was really interesting. I had one friend that said, I actually feel quite damaged from my parents' divorce. It was really high conflict. I was really involved in the middle. I didn't really know what to do. I didn't feel safe. And actually, my parents never spoke until the day I got married. And they actually felt that that had caused them harm, that they're still living with in adulthood. And then I had another friend on the other side who there was conflict at the time, but they managed to overcome it. And although they weren't the best of friends, they managed to get on. They communicated, they talked, they went to sort of family events over the years. And that person felt that they'd had no damage at all from their parents divorcing, acknowledged that they weren't happy and they were better parents being apart. So it is really interesting to see how things can affect children from a very early age right the way through into the 30s, 40s and beyond.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, I think that's really, really well said. I think just as you said, that the parents have their relationship. I mean, they don't, we always have this thing like, oh, it would be great if they were friends, but actually they don't need, to your point, like, they don't need to be friends. They just need to be good co-parents.
Exactly.
Right. And the other thing, to your point about how long the court takes, I also think, imagine you're a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old and you're waiting months and months, and before you know it, you're 4, and that's a huge part of your life.
It's a quarter.
Yeah, exactly. It's a quarter of your life that your parents are, whatever, messing around, making things more difficult. It's a very stark reminder that, to your point, Emma, we need to do all that we can, all of us, to try and resolve things in a sensible way. Yeah, that was very helpful.
Yeah, we've probably got time for a couple more, or 1 or 2 more questions. So there's another question that has come up, is around what to do if my child doesn't want to go. They don't want to go to their other parent's house. What do I do? And I think this probably varies according to age, doesn't it, Heather?
I think it does, and it's a difficult one, and actually it's also a very common one on so many different levels, right? There's a little child, and then there's the other ones who, for so many different reasons. And I think that the most important thing is to start by listening to your child and helping them, let them just feel heard without any judgment. And again, without saying but. So as generally as parents, we want to get rid of the word but. Anyone should, really, because it just it kind of negates anything that we said, and we could replace it by and. But we want to just give them the chance to air what they have to say. And then if you can, then we want to talk to your co-parent. Wouldn't that be good? And just explain how they're feeling. And determine what it is. Maybe it's something as straightforward as it's further away and therefore it's more difficult for them to see their friends. Could be that they, miss the dog. It could be these things that once you uncover it, sometimes you're quite amazed by what it is that was causing it. So that's always the first port of call, because you find out things and then you hear them emotionally, and then again talk to the co-parent, and then are there things that you can do? For example, all the things that are under our control, we can do as much as we can to make transitions smooth. And right, we haven't talked about that, but transitions, I'm slightly tangent here, but transitions are super important because they are usually can be the only time that a child may see both their parents together. So I think the great example always is to think about your child once again, scanning your two faces, right, and seeing how you interact together, and what they don't know, they make up. So really just think, can you work with your co-parent to make sure those transitions are as smooth as possible, which means also don't bring up any issues at the time. It's just about the transitions for your child. And then, once they've been listened to, encourage them. If you do need to make some little adjustments on the timing, try and work together and do as much as you can to make it as positive experience for both, for everybody involved.
Yeah, I mean, I can imagine, it's about making assumptions, some of this, isn't it? If you make an assumption about why they don't want to go, and it actually may be that they might say, well, actually, I just find it really difficult when we meet and you and dad don't look at each other nicely, and if you can, that's quite easily solved potentially.
Yeah.
Or it might be that I remember talking to somebody once what had come out from the child was that actually he was worried that his dad wasn't going to be all right when he was at home by himself. So he was actually just worried about the parent he was leaving behind.
Yeah.
So it may be something that you're really not expecting that might come out.
Yeah, and it can be in a younger child, they absolutely may have, some separation anxiety as they get used to it. And that's why, with young children, we tend to say sort of, more short, little, often, again, positive. Can you take something with you? It's a bit like when they go into school in the beginning, and how can you make that transition and change as positive together? And I think going back to Emily's point, as much as you can, all these things you have to do with communication and trying to think, how can we work this out to make it as as positive for the child as possible.
Brilliant. That seems like a fantastic sentence to finish on. So what I'd like to do now is really thank you, Heather, for your time today. I think there has been a huge amount of really valuable information for people to take away from here. Could you, just before we finish, would you mind letting everybody know where they can find you online, and how they should get in touch with you if they would like to? And we'll make sure that we post all of our contact details as well on the YouTube channel. So just run through those for us.
I would just like to say what a great team. It's been fantastic working with both of you. I think that we just covered a lot of really, really helpful ground. So with everybody's input. So thank you so much. I'm at the Parenting Partnership online or LinkedIn, various places. And please do just look on my website. I've got, as Claire mentioned, lots of different blogs and articles that I hope are helpful. And then please otherwise just send me a message, and I'm really happy to have a chat. I work with parents generally one-on-one, generally with one parent. And also, as Claire said, I have a course that I'm in the process of just making sure it gets launched in a way that's out there for everybody. So please do get in touch. I would love to help.
Brilliant. Thank you ever so much, Heather. And thank you, Emily, as well, for your really valuable input too. And the Divorce Support Club will be back in September. Thank you very much.